Hello everyone and welcome to today's session on MVC and the MVVM model. Do you know friends that MVC and the MVVM are the popular design patterns in the software development? So today we will study about Model View Controller and Model View Model one by one. Watch this video till the end to know about MVC and the MVVM design pattern. Now before we hit on our today's agenda, do not forget to hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon. Let's discuss about today's agenda. So first, we are going to study about what is MVC. Moving ahead, we are going to study about components of the MVC model. Then, we are going to learn about features of the MVC model. Moving ahead, we are going to discuss about advantages of the MVC model. Then, we will learn about the disadvantages of the MVC model. Moving ahead, we are going to discuss what is MVVM model. Then, we will learn about components of the MVVM model. Moving ahead, we are going to discuss about features of the MVVM model. Then, we are going to discuss about advantages of the MVVM model. And then, we will learn about the disadvantages of the MVVM model. And at the end, we are going to discuss difference between MVC and the MVVM design model.
Now let's start with what is MVC. A website cannot be structured in a standardized manner. A website design pattern vary as much as websites themselves. Look through Facebook. Facebook has to be one of the most complicated websites that people use on a regular basis. When a user visits their homepage, the website sends at least a half dozen data requests to populate a page with a plethora of components. Each of these components is designed to render asynchronously so that the failure of one component has no effect on the rest of the page. Now consider a website like Google. One of the most appealing aspects of Google is that their main website has one of the most famously simple user interface on the internet. Google.com, on the other hand, has to be one of the most logically complex web applications anyone has ever imagined. When a user types a character into the Google search bar, it searches a database of previously searched phrases to generate auto-completed answers that are thought to be the most relevant one to the user. Now, one can easily imagine the logic that is necessary to run an application like Facebook would be very different from the logic that is necessary to run an application like Google. At its core, any website's functionality is simply a way in which the front end or the view can reach the appropriate model to retrieve the data. In any case, there will be always a model and there will be a view. What really changes is the way in which this model and view are connected. In the world of web development, the view of a website manipulates the model of a website in one of the two ways, with a controller or with a view model. And as you'll see, each method of communication has advantages and disadvantages. Now let me tell you what is exactly MVC. MVC stands for Model View Controller, the most common way for a data model to be connected to an application's view via an interface known as controller. The controller in the MVC pattern acts as a tool that directly manipulates the data in the given model. Now, let's study about the components of MVC. The first one is model. The model component contains data and logic. It represents data being transferred between controller component or to the business logic. For example, a controller object can assist you in retrieving customer information from a database. It manipulates the data before returning to the database or using it to render the same data. That is basically how a controller acts with the model. Now let me tell you about the second one, is view. A view is a component of the application that represents the data presentation. The data gathered from the model data is used to create views. A view requests information from the model in order to resend the output to the user. Next, we have controller. The component of the application that manages user interaction is called controller. The user's mouse and keyboard inputs are interpreted by the controller, which then instructs the model and the view to adjust as necessary. The model receives a command from the controller to update its state, for example, saving this specific document. The controller additionally issues directives to its associated view to alter the presentation of that view. For example, scrolling a particular document. So basically, these were the components of MVC. Now there is one thing to be noted, that nowadays websites front end and the backends are completely decoupled from one another. Website user interfaces have grown far too complex for the MVC pattern's view component to be stored in the same file as its data models. The front end and the back end are only linked by GET or POST requests and the JSON strings organized by the controller and a router. Now, the MVC pattern was basically designed specifically so that the view and the model do not need to know anything about each other. As a result, MVC pattern enables developers to work on different components of a web application at the same time without interfering with one another. Now, let's discuss some of the features of the MVC model. First is, it is effortless and simple testability. So basically, MVC patterns provides an effortless and simple testability. Next is, you can also take the advantage of the features which are already provided by ASP.NET, Django, JSP, etc. It also gives you total control of your both HTML and your URLs. And the next and the most important and interesting feature is a test-driven development is also supported. And the final one is that this architecture provides kind of a logic separation. Now, let's discuss the advantages of MVC model. First one, it is possible to develop various components in parallel. The next one is that by separating an application into distinct MVC units, it basically avoids total complexity. The next and the interesting feature is that it employs a front controller pattern which utilizes a single controller to handle web application requests. And the final one is that it has the best assistance for the test-driven development. Now, let's discuss the disadvantages of MVC model. However, the MVC design pattern has a number of disadvantages. For one thing, using controller to manipulate data models create a backend clutter. Each model in a database is kind of expected to have its own controller. So, an application scales much larger and evolves into an operation with many related models. The number of controller used also must grow in this lockstep. And this combined with the natural introduction of new layers of abstraction caused by the Morse framework results in a code base that is extremely difficult to navigate. So basically, I gave you an overview of disadvantage of MVC model when an application is about to scale. So here I have mentioned certain points, let's go through them. The first one is UI and the business logic are kind of combined. So that makes a very bad disadvantage for MVC. Next is that it is difficult to implement and reuse tests. Moving ahead, we have that there is no formal validation. Next one, we can see also that the data complexity and efficiency issues as well as MVC challenges when used to modern user interfaces. Next one, we have in order to carry out a parallel programming, several programmers are required. And the final one is that the multiple technologies also must be understood. So this all makes the perfect points for the disadvantages of MVC model. Now, let's discuss what is MVVM model. MVVM stands for Model, View and View Model. The MVC format's popularity can be attributed in large part to the fact that it is relatively simple to understand in comparison to the other design patterns. At first glance, creating a controller that allows the view to manipulate the data models appears to be the simplest way to connect a disjointed model and view. This indirect approach to allowing the view to communicate with the backend, however, is not suitable for every application. The controller method in particular does not well with the single page applications. Now, let's discuss about the components of MVVM model. The first one being is model. Data and pertinent logic are stored in the model. It represents any related business logic and data that is being transferred between controller components. For instance, a controller object will get students' information from the institution's database. It modifies the data and either uses it to render the same data or sends it back to the database. Next we have is view. The term view refers to the user interface elements like HTML, CSS, jQuery, etc. As a result, the MVVC pattern view is held accountable for displaying the data that was received from the controller. Additionally, this view changes the model into the user interface. AngularJS is a popular framework that favors the MVVM pattern over the MVC pattern. The next we have is view model. The view model is responsible for presenting functions, commands, methods to support the state of the view. It is also accountable to operate the model and activate the events in the view. This is why single-page application complements the view model so well. It is straightforward and allows the view to communicate directly with the backend. As a result, MVVM single-page applications can move quickly and fluidly while continuously saving data to the database. For example, in our ecosystem, we have Google Docs would be the perfect example of the MVVM model. Now, let's discuss the features of MVVM model. The first one is that the data binding capabilities are built into the MVVM for desktop applications using the XAML and the iNotify property changed interface. The next feature of MVVM model is the view model uses an observer pattern if you want to make changes to it. And the final one is the features of MVVM applications include WPF, Silverlight and Enroute, and there are many more. Now, let's discuss the advantages of using MVVM model. The first one is that the business logic is independent of user interface. Next, it is kind of simple to test and maintain. It also has easily reusable parts. And the most important advantages is that MVVM makes your application architecture as loosely coupled as possible. And the final advantage which I'm going to discuss is that without referencing the view, you can create unit tests for both model and view model layers. Now, let's discuss few of the drawbacks of the MVVM model. The disadvantages: MVVM model upkeeps the numerous controller codes. Some people also believe that the MVVM architecture may be excessive for simple user interfaces. The view and the view model are not tightly coupled. So these were few of the disadvantages of the MVVM model. Now, let's discuss the differences between MVVM and the MVC model. The first one is that the controller is where the application begins for the MVC architecture. And for the MVVM model, it shows that the view serves as the application's front door. Next, we have that the MVC controller and the view relationships are kind of one-to-many. And for the MVVM model, we have one-to-many relationships between view and view model. For the MVC design pattern, we have view does not have any reference to the controller. But on contrary, we have MVVM model, view have references to the view model. If we talk about the MVC design pattern, it is kind of difficult to read, change, to unit test and also to reuse the model. But on contrary, the MVVM model, if we talk about, debugging process will be difficult when we have complex data bindings. And the final difference which I'm going to discuss and conclude this session is that the MVC is kind of an old model, whereas MVVM is relatively new model. This was all for today's session. I hope so you would have got a brief idea regarding what is MVC design pattern and what is MVVM design pattern. If you have any query, please drop a comment in the comment box. Till then, I'll see you next time.
Just a quick info guys. Intellipaat provides full stack web development course in collaboration with ENICT IIT Guwahati. The course link of which is given in the description below.